Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Spar and Brawl. We are exactly 3 days away, almost 2 days away from the US election, so we thought we'd just do a little last video. Maybe we'll do one more video on election day and just go over some of the polls right now. So, as everybody's seen, everything is pointing towards a Biden presidency, but let's just look at a few interesting polls that have come out over the last few days. So, the first one I'm going to start with is Texas. Texas, as everybody knows, has been typically a red state. However, right now the race is very tight and it could swing towards Biden. They have 38 electoral votes out of a total of 538 electoral votes in the US presidency system. So they are a huge state. If they happen to flip blue, that would be a huge win for Biden. So a new poll was taken just last week by the University of Massachusetts, and they found that Trump has the support of 48% of likely Texas voters and Biden is at 47%. So not only does this indicate that the race is going to be incredibly close, however, what I found to be interesting is that there was a small shift. So in September 29th, Trump was leading Biden by 3 points, and now it's been brought down to just 1 point over, I guess, the course of 3 weeks. And Texas is also leading state in early votes, and they have already casted more votes than they did for the entire 2016 election. So, I mean, huge voter turnout. This part of the poll was very interesting, though, and I think it makes me think that Trump is going to take it. So, among those who have already voted, Biden leads Trump 52% to 46%. However, among those who intend to vote on election day, Trump leads Biden by 64% to 30%. So huge gaps. So it's just these kind of gaps that they've been finding that makes you think, it's still unclear where this election is going to go, although as we'll see, everything is pointing towards Biden. So the university also polled for New Hampshire and North Carolina. In New Hampshire, Biden leads with 10 points, and in North Carolina, they're tied. And then some other polls were taken, namely on Florida. So New York Times and Siena College released a poll on November 1st, and they found that Biden leads Pennsylvania with 6 points and Florida with 3 points. So these are just insane. If he happens, to win Pennsylvania and Florida, it's all over. Apparently, Georgia has become a battleground as well, where the two candidates are neck and neck. They only have 16 electoral votes, but still. And Wisconsin, maybe people have heard about in the news. This is the crazy one. Polls are showing that Biden is leading by like 10 points or more. And this is one of the states where the polls were completely wrong in 2016. So Sam, we also talked about a few weeks ago, we also talked about these two professors who put out their forecast, and they've been forecasting elections for the past few decades. And they forecasted the popular vote, and they wrote that a popular victory for Joe Biden over Donald Trump, and by an ample margin to avoid worries of an electoral college upset seemed to be in play. So they believe that the popular vote, their forecast of the popular vote is so high that for sure there aren't going to be any electoral problems. But yeah, so everything seems to be pointing towards Biden, maybe perhaps easily winning. Over 90 million Americans have already voted, which is insane. My understanding is around 100 million Americans typically vote during each election. So 90 million is just astronomical. And interestingly, apparently, if the polls, because everybody, of course, remembers in 2016 how the polls went completely wrong. But in 2012, actually, they were also wrong, but this time they underestimated how many people would vote for Obama. But apparently, if the polls are as wrong as they were in 2016, Biden should still win the electoral votes. But yeah, so Sam, what do you think is going to happen on election night, and what do you think is going to happen the next day? Because I think these are kind of the interesting questions, given all the mail-in ballots and the early voting that's been going on.
Yeah, exactly. Look, you have that unsettling feeling that maybe 2016 will repeat itself, but as you mentioned, all polling and all, um, factoring in even uh, mistakes, factoring in them being wrong, still seems Biden is going to take it, and that kind of makes sense. First of all, Hillary did win the popular vote. Hillary was the most unpopular Democratic candidate ever, even though, in
Yeah.
my view, that was somewhat unjustified. Biden is much more popular with the working class, with the older people. So it does kind of make sense in a way, but I do have that unsettling feeling that Trump's gonna get it in a way, because of the concept of shy voters. They talk about the idea that many Trump voters don't want to admit that they're Trump voters, or they don't want to give out their information, or they are not parts of the population that are usually asked about. So there may be all these factors that come into play. But I saw Kyle Klinsky did a breakdown of the polls, and he said even in the best case scenario for Trump, he would basically edge out a victory. Best case scenario based on existing polls, and worst case scenario for Biden is like losing just by a couple of electoral votes or something. So it does seem like uh, yeah, it does seem like Biden's gonna take it. What is somewhat worrying is the idea what they some people have called red dawning, which is the idea that Trump will win on the day of the election because his supporters are far more willing to vote in person these days, while because in US you cannot they are not right now counting the mail-in
Yeah.
ballots because they can count them on the day of the election. So Biden might win in a slow fashion, and it might take more than usual to count all the votes because of the record number that you mentioned of early voting in the US, which could lead to tensions. Which and then Trump has talked about uh, dispute, like perhaps disputing the results if he loses. Perhaps he might take legal action, so we might see a repeat of 2000, that Supreme Court basically has to decide. Supreme Court, which by the way now is 6-3 conservative.
Yeah.
But
That's crazy. They're
uh,
6-3
uh,
now.
I think so, yeah. I think so, yeah. It was 5
Yeah,
to 4
because five
before
to
anyway.
four is best case scenario. So yeah, they lost. Yeah.
Yeah, but this time around, the fear of violence in terms of gun violence, that type of thing, is far higher because of the not just nature of Trump supporters. I mean, it's just the tensions are far higher. Even if Trump does win, there's a good chance Democrats will dispute. I mean, I say
Yeah.
good chance. They don't have the balls to do that,
Yeah.
but they have made some, like, yeah, he may have meddled with the mails, he may have blah, that type of thing.
Yeah.
So that's kind of worrying. But besides that, I largely agree with you that it's probably going to be Biden. But just like you, especially after the experience with 2016 and all that, everybody's a bit
Yeah.
cautious, including me,
And I
I
mean,
think.
these polls, all of them, I don't know why, but they all always poll around 1,000 people. It's never more, and maybe maybe it doesn't make that much of a difference if you get more. But I realize they're always between the 900 and 1,100 people, and that
I
they
really didn't look
give
into
the
them. I thought some of them would be bigger. And to be honest, I
yeah
mean,
the ones I've seen.
I studied a bit of sociology, and I think you're studying sociology now, and especially methodology and all that. Is Polling is
Oh,
generally
100%.
extremely unreliable way of, like, people who participate in polls, like, are
Yeah.
not are not
Yeah.
quite exact, representation of the population. People tend to lie. People tend to make mistakes. They change their minds. So there are all
Yeah.
these different things that can be wrong with polls.
Definitely.
Although, as you mentioned, like, yes, I think Sagar mentioned this on the Useful Idiot podcast. Yeah, Crystal Ball and Sagar were on that show this week, and I think if Trump wins, this is the biggest polling debacle or
Oof.
error
Yeah.
since 1948. So it would be quite odd. It would
Yeah.
be quite.
Yeah, but some of the polls I see some interesting stuff. Like the Texas one, what I liked is the one where so they talk about people had already voted, and then they found that compared to people who intend to vote, these kind of differentiations are interesting, and maybe they give you more of an accurate
Yeah,
picture.
possibly they give you a better understanding. I
But
mean,
yeah,
the best reports are the ones that mix different polls and all that, and they do a meta-analysis,
yeah,
meta-study, blah blah. So, but it's still, yeah, in the end of the in the end of the line, who knows, to be honest. But I would, if I had to put my money on it, I would put it on Biden, of course.
yeah. There's just two small things that come to my mind that just one is I was just mentioning to you before is that how the Green Party has like is completely like has nothing to do with this election. Although in 2016 it played a bigger part, and Jill Stein was a decent name. So that's just kind of sad this year. But
At
uh,
least, at least within left-wing circles.
yeah, and there's just one other thing that I've been thinking about recently is that even I've said it, and a lot of people say is that okay, Trump didn't gain any new voters. You know, if anything, it lost some supporters over the past 3 to 4 years. Except it seems like he gained among Latinos, right? So that's an interesting dynamic, and Latinos are apparently one group of Americans that Biden is really not doing well with. So that's just kind of interesting to follow, and of course, when it comes to Florida,
Yeah, the problem with identity politics is that it is extremely limited because in reality, people don't identify themselves so much through their race or
hmm,
culture. Like, at least their voting behavior tends to not be necessarily directly correlated to that. Latino community is far from
yeah,
monolithic,
of
far
course,
less monolithic than even white community and black community. They they tend to be somewhat religiously conservative
yeah,
among the poor and the rich. The rich tend to be far more conservative and pro-liberal, for example, than compared to rich white people in many ways. So yeah, and he's been gaining among Latinos. And for example, in Mexico, he Trump surprisingly ended up having good relationship with the left wing. I mean,
hmm,
he's described as a left wing president, and he is in many ways left wing, but he's more should be, in my view, viewed as nationalist. And that's why he's been like the Mexican president has had a relatively good relation with Trump because they kind of understand each other's language and
but Sam,
nationalistic.
all this just reminds me actually there hasn't been any Mexico bashing
Exactly,
by
that's the
Trump,
thing. In
none.
fact, he praised the Mexican government couple of because Mexico has been
Ah,
fighting
that
with
was a
so
big part. I mean, he started off pretty much his campaign with Mexico,
yeah
talking about the
with
wall and
rapists.
the border and
Yeah,
everything is, huh?
they say I assume some of them are good people, but
Yeah,
largely they are
yeah,
rapists and murderers.
exactly. I mean, he started off with that. Then he widened the circle and brought in
No,
a
he
lot of other
yes,
countries
he
and
has
people.
gone. In many ways, he has become a far more traditional Republican candidate. He's gone the dog
100%.
whistle, black, racist route, and as well as the deficit hawk route and all that. But yeah, his relationship with Latino community. Generally speaking, Republicans do much better with Latinos. George Bush did great with Latinos, and the Latin community, well, they have they are there are things that make them closer to the Republican Party, both economically and
Yeah.
culture. So it's yeah, it's a weird one.